What is your darkest family secret? It's me. My dad never told his family I existed. I was shameful, maybe he was more ashamed. After he died they found out about me and kindly asked me not to come to the funeral. I get why he never told them. My dad gave a job to a cousin. I remember as a kid that this cousin I'd never heard of just suddenly popped up out of nowhere without explanation. But I was a kid so didn't really think of it. But everyone made a big deal out of how great it was for my dad to give him a job. I found out 20 years later that he'd been in prison for having a sexual relationship with a student. Father won the lottery and we've been pretending to be poor, so our family doesn't try to ask for money. My great-grandfather shot and killed a man in his grocery store back in the 30s over a poker game. He ran a speakeasy out of the back of his store and lost almost $2K, so as the guy was walking out the front after the store closed he shot him and got away with it by telling the police the man robbed him. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed he told my grandfather what had happened. Found out last year that I'm a direct descendant Thomas Rood. He was the first person to be executed for incest in the US. He raped his daughter Sarah, and it came to light when she gave birth to a son named George. My family line is descended from George. My dad's biological father was a Rood. I know almost nothing about that branch of my family tree, but we could be distant relatives. Tree. You have a family wreath, my friend. I had an uncle who hijacked a plane to Cuba, became a Soviet spy, escaped from prison, and lived under a stolen identity. We don't talk about him. Had an uncle that was a sharpshooter in the US Navy, and there's a famous movie about a mission he was on. He was also batshit crazy, and beat his kids, and was a serious hoarder. My grandma has been having an affair with a family friend's husband for 28 years. Dad's cousin was a prominent Catholic priest known for his staunchly anti-LGBT views. Well, it was quite the surprise when he was arrested trying to solicit a blowjob from an undercover cop at a gay bookstore in New Orleans. My mom walked in on my uncle servicing the best man the night before he married my aunt. This was the mid-1960s, so being bi or gay wasn't something many people admitted to. She said nothing to anyone, only told my dad years later. My grandpa was an engineer who worked on the atom bomb and some missiles in New Mexico. He also designed safety mechanisms on some guns. My family's a bunch of pacifist vegans and my parents met at an anti-bomb rally, so this fact is generally not spoken of. My granddad made hundreds of millions through his business and investments by the time he died. Most of it though only happened a few years before he passed. He never got on well with the rest of the family apart from my parents. As a result, he left everything to charity in his will. Of course, the family weren't happy about this and wanted to get rich from his hard work, so they lawyered up and fought for years to get the money. Unfortunately they eventually won, not all of it but most, taking millions from needy charities and spending it on houses, cars, holidays and gambling. Lots and lots of gambling. Needless to say, we don't talk to that part of the family. My great aunt had a thing for this guy. The problem was that this guy happened to be married. That little detail didn't stop my great aunt. So what did she do? Well, she killed the man's wife. Apparently when he went off to work early one morning, she broke into the house and killed the woman by sawing her off head. Then she cleaned up the mess, buried the body in the backyard, tidied the house up, cooked dinner and waited for the man to come home. When he got home he noticed the house was a bit different. Out comes my great to greet him. This was the first time the man had met my great aunt. And what did this man do? Well, he thought it was a great gesture of love. They called the police and he covered up for my great aunt's crime. Says he did it. He gets arrested and spends a couple of years in prison and then bribes his way out. He moves into his old home with my great aunt and they had a happy marriage for over 40 years later until he passed away from natural causes. My mother was sent to an unwed mother's home to have her first child. In Australia this was very commonplace even as late as the 70s. This is referred to as forced adoption as the mother never had a chance to even try to keep their child. It was common practice for families to send their pregnant and wed daughters to these places to complete their pregnancy and give the child away without the neighbors knowing. On top of that, she has since found out through ancestry DNA that her father wasn't her father and her mother was pregnant with her to another man before her parents were married. Talk about hypocrisy. My great uncle assisted the Nazis with deporting and executing Jews in Norway. My great grandfather was an alcoholic and drank beer daily while driving to and from work. One day, he was on a gravel road and hit a little girl. She passed away, and one of his friends took the blame. I'm not sure why the friend took responsibility, but apparently, my great grandfather wasn't the same after that. He quit drinking and changed his ways. My great aunt stole my mom and her brother from my grandmother and sold them to an adoption agency and declared them dead. My mother still hasn't found my biological grandmother after 48 years, though she thinks she did see her once on a visit to Korea. While visiting my mother's native country back in 2004, I would hear someone whimpering/crying every night when it was time for bed. I would mention it to her, and she thought I was crazy. Turns out there was a room between where my aunt's house and the neighbors are where they housed young girls for sex trafficking. My aunt had no clue this was going on, but she was always caught up in some weird shit. No one wants to believe my aunt was part of it, but it was just really weird. When my mom was a kid, she and her siblings used to play in the woods behind the house. They found an old shed that they turned into a playhouse. It had a lot of old equipment in it. Turns out my great grandfather used to make booze in the shed during Prohibition. My grandfather, who passed away in 2010, married my grandma who was 18 and he was 50. She was abused physically and he raped all the kids, but my father, including his adopted children. We later found out that's why I wasn't allowed to be alone with him as an adult. Now my father's in jail for molesting a child. After learning about that and digging deeper, it turns out he raped his adopted sister when he was a kid. He found Jesus though, so we are all supposed to pretend it didn't happen. Thanks Jesus. One family member killed another by leaving a bag of poisoned donuts on the front steps. We are now hesitant about accepting donuts. Be sure to like and subscribe for more eating Reddit videos. Thanks, bye.